Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Dillian Whyte and Alexander Povetkin pay-per-view event attracted over 200,000 buys according to worldboxingnews.net. So it is reporting the official figures as 222,000 buys. And if those figures are to be believed, they say these are the official figures. It's not good news for Dillian Whyte. Obviously, this was the lowest pay-per-view event that he's been involved with since he began being on pay-per-view, and especially since headlining. Bearing in mind he's been in, I think it's 5 pay-per-views now. One of those was headlined by Anthony Joshua, with Dillian Whyte being the B-side. But since then he's fought Joseph Parker, Derek Chisora, Oscar Rivas, and now Alexander Povetkin on pay-per-view. And those numbers with Parker and Chisora were reasonably healthy. They were close to 500,000 buys. Oscar Rivas was a lower amount, but this one again is 222,000 buys. According to the outlet, 150,000 buys lower than the Rivas one. So there's a bit to sort of go through and mull over when you sort of discuss these sorts of figures, because there could be multiple things going on here, and I don't think it's just about the pandemic. It could have also been about the matchup. There's a few things heading into this. A lot of people thought that this was a Dillian Whyte sort of pay-per-view event, that he was going to go in there, get the win. There wasn't much on the undercard, that it was going to be signed, sealed and delivered for a Whyte win. Clearly that didn't happen. Alexander Povetkin, a stunning knockout win. Not a shock, not at least to me and many others, that Povetkin was always going to be in this fight, but obviously it was against the form book. And I think we can sort of attribute some of it to the pandemic, clearly with boxing having sort of struggled somewhat since the pandemic has come back. Numbers across the board for shows in the United Kingdom and elsewhere have been down. But generally that has been in part because the shows haven't been that great. And even with this pay-per-view event, you could have looked at some of the undercard and gone, should those fights be on a pay-per-view undercard? Especially as there were only 5 fights on the bill. There were some good fights on the undercard, but maybe they were sort of destined, or should have been destined, for another card that wasn't on pay-per-view. A strong lineup elsewhere, on regular TV, for example. But the pandemic, clearly it's playing some sort of part. And with a number of jobs having gone in the United Kingdom, people are out of work. Obviously, some people have decided not to buy. And with the interest in the sport potentially being a bit down, maybe some people, especially casual fans, weren't as aware of the upcoming boxing as they have been previously. Maybe it didn't gain the sort of hype and notoriety that events of this nature have in the past. I think there is that factor with the pandemic, with people just aren't watching as much boxing. It hasn't been as popular. Maybe they weren't aware of this, and there is a knock-on effect. Some people just can't afford to sort of shell out the sort of £20 or so for the event, and I can totally see that would have had some sort of impact. And then you sort of chuck on there that there were those who were sort of saying they didn't want to buy this event because they didn't believe it was going to be nearly as competitive as they thought it should be, being on pay-per-view. Some people were saying this wasn't a 50-50, that Dillian Whyte was going to sort of canter in. He'd beat Alexander Povetkin, and that in effect he had cherry-picked Alexander Povetkin, a guy who was close to 41 years old and shouldn't have been in this sort of event. But clearly Povetkin showed he is still an elite level fighter. He can still fight at the top level and get wins against guys who are legitimate top 10 contenders. That has been proven again. Obviously Povetkin had a very good fight with Michael Hunter back at the end of 2019. He beat Hughie Fury also in that year. So it's not like he hadn't been in some fights where, those guys could have, put in performances to beat him, but they didn't. Povetkin getting a draw against Hunter and getting a comfortable decision against Hughie Fury. So I think some of that probably has played into it as well, because at the end of the day, it wasn't a fight that people were calling for. It was the fight people were getting, and it was a good fight, and clearly it proved to be a upset in some people's minds. But it wasn't the sort of fight that people were baying for, thirsting for, and saying, yes, I'll pass over my money at any cost to see that fight. It just wasn't one of those. And with Povetkin not really sort of contributing to the sort of promotion in the sense of trash talk or anything of the like, doesn't necessarily help the sort of hype and buzz. But Whyte had been in that situation before, against Oscar Rivas, for example, where Rivas didn't really contribute much in terms of promoting the event and trying to build it up. So I think there is, a bit of that, but the pandemic must have played the biggest part in it, because buys are way down. Because if you do a direct comparison, a lot of people do know who Alexander Povetkin is, as opposed to Oscar Rivas. And you look at those two fights, and I would just sort of say, well, the Povetkin one, in normal circumstances, should do better than the Rivas one. But clearly we're not in normal circumstances. And this is sort of gets me to my next point. Why are they in such a rush if the viewing figures for the first fight in terms of the pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, why would they want to sort of just pummel ahead, have the rematch within 3 months? Because ultimately the numbers might still be down. Sure, there might be some more interest for the rematch given what happened to the first fight. Some people will say, well, look, Dillian Whyte's career is on the line. If Povetkin wins again, it's a long road back for Whyte. So there could be some more interest, some good storylines there. But ultimately, it's still an uncertain time. Some people are still out of work. Some people are still hurting and struggling. Just shelling out $20 for boxing, where a lot of people can actually probably find it for free streaming. Streaming probably becomes quite an attractive option for a number of people. But if we're in this uncertain period where the interest is down, the buys are likely to be down again over what you would normally expect pre-pandemic, why ram it through? Because if you were to wait maybe 6 months, maybe things would be a bit different. But also in respect of Dillian Whyte having a rematch, 3 months obviously feels an awfully tight turnaround given what happened, how brutally he was knocked out. So I just wonder if the almighty dollar and the sort of, Sky wanting to have these pay-per-views and sort of round out their, 2020, that, calendar year with some good financial sort of wins for their boxing division, perhaps that's what it's coming down to. Because to me, it all feels like it's driven by the dollar. And you'd have to ask the question, is the fighter welfare being put first here? But also they must know, if they were to wait, maybe the buys would be better if things started to improve in the new year. You have to ask that question. So if the buys were somewhat low to begin with in the first fight, who's to say they won't be, somewhat low in the second fight? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.